Okay, the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. And good morning to all of you, and welcome to today's hearing entitled the Department of Energy's Fiscal Year 2012 Research and Development Budget Request. In front of all of us are packets containing the written testimony, biography, and truth in testimony disclosure for today's witness, Energy Secretary Stephen Chu. And I want to welcome everyone here today for this hearing on the President's fiscal year 2012. Is everybody ready to roll? Mr. Chairman, I recognize myself for 5 minutes on opening statement, and I will just take less than 5 minutes, but we don't hold you to 5 minutes. We appreciate you being here very much, and you may want to enlarge on some things, and you may not want to. That'll be your decision. I want to welcome everyone here today for the hearing on the President's fiscal year 2012 budget request for the Department of Energy. This is the third time that Secretary Chu has appeared before this committee, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank for all of you for your willingness to be here and meet with members on Department of Energy programs and priorities. This is also the third DOE budget that the President sent to Congress, so it's general priorities, and our concerns with them should come at no surprise. What's notable, however, is the degree to which the President is what I guess in a poker game you'd call it double down on his energy and climate agenda in light of the continued struggle in economy, trillion-dollar deficits, rising gas prices, and fuel supply concerns driven by Middle East turmoil. The centerpiece of this legislation is the President's proposed requirement that the U.S. produce 80% of its electricity from, quote, clean, unquote, sources by 2035. While I want to better understand how the administration intends to reach this goal, and while I strongly support an, quote, all of the above, quote, approach to energy security, I'm concerned that the plan entails spending that we really can't afford, and taxes and regulations that would severely raise the cost of energy and harm, in my opinion, and a lot of our opinions, our economy. The merits of this proposal seem weakened further by the fact that even if such a transition to clean electricity were successful, its benefits in terms of the effect it could have on climate change appears negligible. My concerns regarding misplaced energy policy priorities extend to the R&D budget as well. The fossil fuels that drive our economy and meet over 80% of our energy need continue to be penalized in favor of cleaner alternatives. But that seems to continue. For example, the natural gas and unconventional fossil fuels technology programs are zeroed out, while energy efficiency and renewable energy R&D programs would receive $1 billion or 44% increase above current levels. And these increases come on the heels of over $16 billion in stimulus funding and a near doubling of the EERE, their base budget since FY 2006. I'm also concerned that much of the clean energy spending is focused on late-stage technology development and commercialization more appropriately performed by the private sector. The changes called for in this budget are not just trends. They represent dramatic shifts that warrant our close review and consideration in the coming weeks and months. While I have many concerns, I look forward to working with the Secretary, Ranking Member Mrs. Johnson, and members of the committee to develop a thorough and constructive response to these proposals. I now recognize the Ranking Member, Mrs. Johnson, for as long as she takes for an opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome back to the committee, Dr. Chu. We are here today to discuss the President's fiscal year 2012 budget request for the Department of Energy, even though as the fiscal year 2011 budget still dominates the attention of the Congress. For both budget years and likely for years to come, the issue remains the same. While we must be fiscally responsible, We also must keep America competitive and create a better future for the American people. I agree with Chairman Hall. We are in a dangerous position as relates to our national deficit. As any responsible American family would do, we have to reconcile how much money the government spends on what it brings in. But we are also in danger of jeopardizing our standard of living and our future if we allow good programs to fall victim to indiscriminate cuts. It is time to set priorities and make hard choices that do not leave our workforce ill-prepared and hamper the country's ability to innovate and grow. If a family's budget is squeezed, they don't solve the problem by pulling the kids out of school. We cannot roll back the clock on our economy. Our economic woes weren't caused by too much science. At a time like this, we need to make the critical investments to bolster our research infrastructure and our future workforce. Advancing our technological capabilities now while sowing the seeds for the industry of the future. And let me be clear, I stand with the President and a number of respected conservative columnists, numerous policy experts, and I believe the American people when I say that these are investments and not just spending. With research and science education, there is a guaranteed return. If the continuing resolution passed by the House 2 weeks ago were enacted, the Department of Energy's basic science and energy R&D portfolios, as well as its extensive work of national laboratories and world-class facilities, would be devastated. At the same time, these cuts would have negligible real impact on our national deficit. If this CR is enacted, it is known that within months, STEM education, teacher training, workforce development, and activities of DOE will likely cease. Many thousands of research scientists, graduate students, technical and administrative staff, contractors, and other support staff across the country will be laid off or furloughed. The impact on indirect jobs is expected to even be greater. Research projects will be delayed or terminated. Unique world-class scientific facilities used by industry and academia will have operating times decreased, will be temporarily shuttered, or even completely closed. Ongoing construction and upgrades at the labs and national user facilities will not move forward, costing more in scheduling delays and broken contracts, and restricting or eliminating access for academic and industrial researchers. This is especially worrisome to me because, as we know, the last hired are often the first fired. Many of the graduate students and early career researchers that our future depends on will likely be the first to lose their jobs. This strikes at the heart of a generation ripe with a passion for innovating. Young people who are willing to work long nights in labs across the country to find solutions to our nation's economic and national security, energy, and environmental problems. All of this could happen as countries like China, India, Germany, Japan, and many others seize on our weakness in this economic downturn to invest billions of dollars to build up their own clean energy, technology sectors to compete with, or attract U.S. companies. For example, in 2009 alone, China's government investment attracted $35 billion in private capital for clean energy technologies. The U.S. came in a distant second, attracting a little more than half that much. In the President's recent State of the Union address, he spoke at length about the need to reinvigorate the American capacity for innovation, and he highlighted the economic opportunities that lie in clean energy technologies. For fiscal year 2012, requests for DOE proposes increases in a number of critical programs while making some tough but prudent decreases in others. This is a direct illustration of the President's commitment to clean energy future and takes us into the opposite direction of where the CR would leave us. This committee has heard from a number of organizations, industry associations, national labs, and academia on the negative impact of the proposed CR cuts and the important roles these programs play in our economy. Mr. Secretary, as you testify today, I hope to learn from you how the proposed cuts to DOE will impact our country's innovation pipeline and the young people preparing for careers in these exciting new fields, and how the President's vision will leave us better prepared to lead the global economy in this century. I look forward to working with you and members on both sides of the aisle on these important issues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson, for a good opening statement. If there are members who want to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. And I have the privilege of introducing the witness at this time. Dr. Chu serves as the 12th Secretary of Energy. Prior to his service as Secretary at DOE, Dr. Chu was the Director of DOE's Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and was a Professor of Physics and Molecular and Cell Biology at the University of California. He was a co-winner of the 1997 Nobel Prize for Physics, and that's quite an honor. As our witness knows, I know, spoken testimony is limited to 5 minutes, after which the members of the committee will have 5 minutes each to ask questions. The chair is able to provide, and the committee is willing to provide some flexibility to you since you're our only witness today, and for the important position that you hold and the gratitude we have to you for appearing before us. Recognize you at this time, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Hall, and thank you, Ranking Member Johnson, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the President's fiscal 2012 budget request for the Department of Energy. Before I begin my statement, I want to acknowledge the absence of Congresswoman Gabriela Giffords, who has been a strong voice on energy issues, especially solar energy. It's been a privilege to work with her over the last 2 years, and I look forward to working with her again as soon as she's ready to return to Washington. President Obama has a plan for the United States to win the future by out-innovating, out-educating, and out-building the rest of the world, while at the same time addressing the deficit. This committee understands the importance of science to our nation's future. We must rev up the great American innovation machine to create jobs and secure our future prosperity. Federal support for scientific research and our applied energy portfolio is critical to our competitiveness. The Department invests in early-stage research that the private sector often considers risky, and we leverage our resources to stimulate private sector investments in deployment. To spur innovation, President Obama has called for increased investments in clean energy research, development, and deployment. In addition, he has proposed a bold but achievable goal of generating 80% of America's electricity from clean sources by 2035. The Clean Energy Standard would provide a clear long-term signal to industry to bring capital off the sidelines and into the clean energy sector. The most competitive clean energy sources will win in the marketplace. The government does not need to pick favorites. The Department of Energy's FY12 budget requests of $29.5 billion supports the President's goals and strengthens the nation's economy and security. Through energy efficiency programs, we will save money for consumers by saving energy. In addition, the budget supports the research, development, and deployment of renewable energy, the modernization of the electric grid, and the advancement of carbon capture and sequestration technologies. And it helps reduce our dependence on oil by developing the next generation of biofuels and accelerating electric vehicle research and development. We're also requesting new credit subsidy to support loan guarantees for renewable and energy efficiency technologies. To jumpstart the nuclear industry, we request up to $36 billion in loan guarantee authority, while also investing in advanced nuclear technologies. The President's budget also invests in basic and applied research and keeps us on the path to doubling the funding for key scientific agencies, including the Office of Science. The budget invests $550 million in the Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, also known as ARPA-E. The administration also seeks an additional $100 million for RPE as part of the President's Wireless Innovation and Infrastructure Initiative. This investment will allow RPE to continue promising early-stage research projects that aim to deliver game-changing clean energy technologies. The Office of Science and RPE play distinct and complementary roles in our research portfolio. The Office of Science supports basic research that furthers scientific understanding, while RPE supports high-risk, high-reward research projects to explore potentially transformative technologies. Another piece of our research effort is the Energy Innovation Hubs. Through the hubs, we are bringing together our nation's top scientists and engineers to achieve similar game-changing energy goals, but where a concentrated effort over a longer time horizon is needed to establish innovation leadership. The budget requests $146 million to support the 3 existing hubs and to establish 3 new hubs. And finally, the budget continues to support the Energy Frontier Research Centers, which are mostly university-led teams working to solve scientific problems that are blocking clean energy development. To reach our energy goals, we must take a portfolio approach to R&D, pursuing several research strategies that have proven to be successful in the past. But I want to be clear. This is not a kitchen sink approach. This work is being coordinated and prioritized with a 360-degree view of how the pieces fit together. Taken together, these initiatives will help America lead in innovation. In addition to strengthening our economy, the budget request also strengthens our security by providing $11.8 billion for the Department's National Nuclear Security Administration. The Department is also mindful of our responsibility to taxpayers. We are cutting back in multiple areas, including eliminating unnecessary fossil fuel subsidies. We are streamlining operations. We are making some tough choices, like freezing salaries and bonuses for hardworking national laboratory, site, and facility management contractor employees. The United States faces a choice today. Will we lead in innovation and outcompete the rest of the world, or will we fall behind? To lead the world in clean energy, we must act now. We can't afford not to. Thank you, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
I thank you, Dr. Chu, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. And my first question, and I may not have enough time to ask the second question, but the centerpiece proposal in President Obama's State of the Union address is his plan to require 80% of U.S. electricity to be derived from so-called clean energy sources, actually not defined anywhere that I can find so far. A study by economists at Suffolk University found that the cost of a clean energy standard similar to what the President's proposing would be almost $200 billion a year and over $4 trillion over a 20-year period. And that's, to be fair with you, is a study of a similar plan, not this identical plan, but of a similar plan. Other studies might estimate these figures to be higher or lower, but as a matter of basic economics, doesn't the President's proposal amount to mandating Americans to pay significantly higher electricity costs? And in terms of restricting fossil fuel usage and raising electricity prices, wouldn't the clean energy sources have the same impact as the administration's now defunct cap and trade proposal?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am not aware of that study, but let me make a few. First, let me define what we mean by clean energy. Solar, wind, new hydro, nuclear, those are all clean energy, and we get full credit. If you look at combined cycle gas, which generates about twice the electricity for the same amount of carbon emission, would get half credit. If one develops coal with carbon capture and sequestration, and suppose you capture 90% of the carbon emissions, that would count as 90% credit. So based on that rough definition, we are now currently generating 40% of our energy as clean. If nuclear is 20% of the electricity is nuclear, hydro is about 6.5%, 7%. The rest is a little bit of solar, but the rest is predominantly wind and a little bit of geothermal. So the President's goal of reaching 80% from 40% by 2035 anticipates, number one, that there will be a new investment in nuclear energy, and this is something we'd like to grow as part of the portfolio. We project that more solar and photovoltaic and solar thermal will be in play, and also more natural gas. When we develop clean coal technologies, and we're going to be working very hard over the next decade to bring it down to affordable price, we think investments in clean coal technologies will kick in. So it's very important that that longer date, 2035, allows for the development of clean coal technologies, allows for the long planning process and construction process of nuclear. In terms of how much it costs, we don't really know, but I'll tell you that if I talk to the utility companies in the coming decades, for example, Duke Energy tells me, Jim Rogers at Duke says, in the next 50 years, every power plant that they now own will have to be replaced. And so the issue is when you have a long time horizon going from 2011 to 2035, you will have to replace a large fraction of these power plants. And so it's in this replacement and building up because for example, many of our coal plants are over 40 or 50 years old. They're in their last legs. As you replace them with newer options, this is a very natural thing. And so we want to give credit to get this going. Now, my last comment about the Clean Energy Standard is that there are estimates of $1 to $2 trillion of capital sitting on the sidelines because of the uncertain conditions of what the U.S. should invest in. And what the Clean Energy Standard does is it tells companies, utility companies, it tells finance companies, this is the direction we're going. You will have a market. If you build an efficient, cost-effective way of generating electricity, you have a market, we can invest in you. And all that capital can come off the sidelines and immediately create jobs.
Do you agree that it'll cost significantly more than that? Or have you had that opinion?
I would want to get back to you on that and have, for example, the EIA and other analysis give you a synopsis of what we think the cost will be. So I'd be happy to do that.
Appreciate it. I want to follow up. A core objective of the President's clean energy proposal is obviously addressing climate change. We look for that all the time. If the President's plan is significantly or successfully, I might say, implemented, and we do indeed achieve the 80%, just double what you've set out as the 40% clean energy goal, how much effect could it have on climate change?
Well, the purpose of this is twofold. The major purpose of this clean energy standard is to unleash capital off the sidelines to allow for the private sector investment in clean energy technologies and also in energy efficiency, which is turning very rapidly into a worldwide race for the development of these technologies. So a primary or the primary driver for what we're doing is we are in a race now, but the world is going to need newer, cleaner sources of energy, a more energy efficient infrastructure. And this creates an incentive for business to invest their capital, private sector capital, in order to win in this race. Now, having said that, if you look at what the President is proposing as a goal, 80% by 2035, this is more or less equivalent to a decrease in carbon dioxide that would put us on a path by mid-century 2050 of reducing the carbon dioxide by 50%. So it is in line with the original goal of doing that. But the most important thing I want to return back to and emphasize is that we are now in a worldwide race. You see China, Japan, India, South Korea, European countries racing to develop these technologies because they know there's going to be a world market for them.
I thank you. I've gone over my time by a few seconds. I'd like to ask how much effect do you really believe it'll have, but I don't have the right to ask that because I'm out of time. I thank you. All right. I now recognize Mrs. Johnson for her question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Chu, as we attempt to cooperate in cutting some of the needed spending, one of the first things that we try to do is look at duplication. There is a lot of concern about duplicative programs, both within DOE and other agencies. In terms of research, how would you define duplication?
Well, how would I define duplication? If certain research programs, for example, within energy or within the Office of Science or RB, are funding more or less the exact same type of research, you would not define it as their solar research. It could be short-term solar research, the kind that RB funds. You only have 2 years to get the private sector to pick it up. Very, very different than the solar research being funded in the Office of Science, where you're mostly tackling basic fundamental science problems that can go to the next new thing. And so it sounds like the same, solar research, but it's a very different type of funding.
There's also a growing sentiment that a number of the proposals that are being slashed will be applied to the R&D. To me, that's one of the most important things that we can do in order to stay in the world race. What do you consider the most dangerous and growing sentiment for wasteful spending or investment in the future? How would you categorize some of the suggestions or recommendations, or even what was passed in the CR 2 weeks ago?
Sure. All right. The President recognizes, and certainly Congress recognizes, that we're going to have to make some tough choices. The deficit is a huge problem, and it has to be tackled. But having said that, if you just do across-the-board uniform cuts, this is not the way to run the country. This is not the way to manage the multivariate programs. You have to make tough choices on what you want to invest in. And in this, I'm reminded of what Norm Orgenstein, a very legendary CEO of and chair of Lockheed Martin, had said, also well-known in Congress on both sides of the aisle, very well respected. And he was CEO of Lockheed Martin, and he said, in all his experiences as an engineer, as a CEO and chair, if you have an overweight, in times of austerity, it's much like if you're designing an airplane and you realize the airplane is overweight, and the way to trim the weight is to cut off an engine. That would not do well. And so you have to recognize what are going to be the engines that are driving the prosperity of our country. And the President has said very clearly that there are two engines. One engine is education, particularly science, engineering, mathematics education, STEM education. And the other engine is energy, because it's no secret that many other countries around the world, most notably China, have recognized that this is a hugely growing technology opportunity, and the country that leads in energy technologies in this multi-trillion-dollar market will be a very wealthy country. That you can wait and let other countries go first, and we can be importing those technologies that we will need, or we can be the front leader and be exporting those. And so in this race for prosperity that will create high-value manufacturing jobs in the U.S., the President said we have to pay attention to this. This is an internationally competitive race that we're in, and that was our Sputnik moment.
Thank you. My time's out, but I need to ask one more question. Could you describe any type of impressive research that might be going on in China right now, or India, or any place?
If the Chairman permits.
Without objection.
All right, thank you. I would say if you look in terms of the impressive research, they are superb in taking some existing technology and driving to the better. So that for that reason, they now have the highest speed railway service in the world. They've captured that lead from France and from Japan. They now can produce the highest voltage and highest capacity transmission lines in the world, and they want to sell to the United States. They are building about half of the nuclear reactors in the world today, over 25, but broken ground over 25, again, to catch up to the rest of the world. They are the dominant force in silicon photovoltaics, or photovoltaics of any kind in the world. They have now taken over the leadership in exports of solar cells. They build the highest efficiency coal plants with all the scrubbers and are now beginning to export them. Their coal plants are now 46% efficient of energy into electricity out. Our most advanced coal plants, I don't even think, break 40%. And so I would say in every energy sector that I know, they're either getting into the lead or become the leaders. And they see a worldwide export market.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Rohrabacher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You just mentioned the President's characterization of the Sputnik moment, and let me just note, we are not in a Sputnik moment. We are in a deficit spending moment. When you see that for the last 2 years straight and now for a third year in a row, this administration is proposing a level of deficit spending that is a shock to the system. We're talking $1.5 trillion a year more in debt for our children to pay. And I'm suggesting to you that that shock has had a major impact and has to make a major impact on our decision making. The answer that you just gave to the ranking member's question, of those technologies that you have just outlined for us that China is racing ahead in terms of putting them into place and into practice, how many of them are based on research that the Chinese did rather than research that was done in the United States or other countries that they have taken advantage of that research?
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, let me go down the list. In nuclear technology, the United States made the first nuclear reactor as part of the Manhattan Project. But leadership and we very quickly in the 70s and early 80s constructed a fleet of roughly a little over 100 civilian nuclear reactors. But we don't own that leadership today and have not owned it for the last couple of decades.
Right. But
France,
in terms of China,
right?
How much of those?
Sure.
What you just suggested,
Right.
you had a list.
Right.
Are any of them based on the research that was done in China and not in the United States? Or what we've seen here is vast amounts of research and you're basically what we do is research and development here, but we're unable to actually put it in place while our adversary in China takes it and runs with it. The problem isn't research and development and the creativity of the American people. Our problem is that we've got government in the way of people, entrepreneurs and investors, and people would like to use this technology here. And I would hope that perhaps the Department of Energy would put some of its effort into breaking through some of these barriers. One I would like to bring up with you today, and that is we need to make sure if the President's goal of having pollution-free energy sources is a wonderful goal. Whether we agree with you on global warming or not, that's irrelevant. The fact is all of us should want less pollution in the air and cheaper energy. So with that understanding, nuclear energy seems like something we could all come together on, because at last the liberal left in this country has at last accepted the fact that nuclear energy needs to be something we looked at. We've got new gas-cooled reactors that offer great promise. Small gas-cooled reactors. How much money is being spent, or how much emphasis, should I say, is being put on gas-cooled reactors as compared to light water reactors, which are the reactors of the past?
Yes, we run a program called Next Generation Nuclear Reactors, and those are the gas reactors we're talking about. We are funding that very steadily, and I think by 2012 we hope to make a decision as to whether we go forward with building a prototype of those reactors. I share your enthusiasm in the sense that those gas-cooled reactors used as heat sources, mostly instead of electricity generation, it could be a very valuable source of energy that could supplement what some of the energy we use, for example, natural gas, in order to generate heat. And so we're very supportive of also small modular reactors, right-sized reactors where you can plop them down in places which don't have the infrastructure for
Well,
1.5
with that
gigawatts.
said, we need help from the Department of Energy in breaking down the licensing process that is preventing the technology that we already have. We have a capability of building those reactors right now. There are several companies that come to me. We could go into production of this now, except the licensing process will take a decade. We need to cut that down because we are spending $1 trillion a year more than we're taking in, and this would certainly contribute to the wealth creation in the United States. So I would hope that we can work together in breaking down that licensing process.
Thank you. Part of our 2012 budget request is for monies to help in the engineering to get licensing, which is in NRC. It's in their job, but we will help those companies license the small modular reactors.
Let's make sure the Chinese don't end up in production of these things that we're inventing right here when we could go into production ourselves if we just break down these governmental barriers. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Hsu.
Thank you, sir. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Chu. You probably don't remember, but I do. The first time I met you, I happened to be on the Stanford campus the day you won the Nobel Prize, and the last time I think I saw you was also on the Stanford campus when we toured the Stanford Linear Accelerator. I ask this not just to you as the Secretary, but as the really respected scientist that you are, what the impacts of the CR, if extended throughout the year, would have on the science that is in the Bay Area. When we toured the Stanford Linear Accelerator, we saw what they were doing in terms of understanding at an atomic level, photosynthesis, for example. I think about the National Ignition Facility over in Lawrence Livermore, and it's a major science experiment, but obviously if it's successful, it will have a profound impact on the energy picture for the world. Persis Drell has indicated that basically she thinks that the linear accelerator would have to simply shut down under the CR budget. What would the impact be on our science future if that were to occur, Dr. Chu?
Well, if you're speaking of the current 2011 CR,
that's correct.
And then if you look at what the proposed 2011 budget is, what the CR was going to bring it back to, and the fact that we're halfway through the year, it would be something on the order of a 40, maybe as high as a 50% cut in the Office of Science. At that level, and in some parts of the Office of Science, it could be far more. So at that level, I think Persis Drell's assessment is correct that many of the user facilities, like the new free electron laser, X-ray laser that SLAC has, would have to be shut down for some time. A lot of graduate students and postdocs might have to be let go. This would, as Ranking Member Johnson said, they would have a devastating impact on the number of jobs, but the ripple effect would be much deeper, because if the students, the engineering and science students, see that federal funding of science can go up and down, bouncing like a yo-yo, they could easily assume, and because most of the research dollars in science and engineering are ultimately at the PhD level and master's level, ultimately coming from the federal government. They said, this is not my career for me, or if they have a PhD, they perhaps look abroad to other countries. So the ripple effect of an unsteady up and down, and certainly draconian cuts in science, would be far more devastating than just the many thousands of jobs that would be lost, or the accelerators that would be turned down. And those accelerators, as you well know, are really engines of innovation. It's those accelerators which have changed the paradigm of how we do medical research. And it's those accelerators change the paradigm of how we do materials research. In those accelerators, we have made discoveries that have allowed us to improve upon the lithium-ion battery in such a dramatic way. You know, the United States is another one of these good stories where the United States and America invents the lithium-ion battery, the dominant battery for plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles. Very quickly, technology leadership went first to Japan, Sony, and now it's a big race between Japan and Korea. Year 2000, we made some basic science discoveries that all of a sudden say, we can improve those batteries, we can improve the lifetime of the batteries, the energy density of the batteries, the safety of the batteries, and it's less expensive to produce. So we're in the process of recapturing that technology lead. And this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar business. And so we need those science facilities. You don't want to shut them down.
On the NIF, we've made a huge investment over the years in the NIF. What would this do? If we project the CR across as the budget for the year, what would it do to that project?
The NIF comes from a different bucket of money. This is funded not by the Office of Science primarily. It's funded actually by the NNSA. And I think the NSA and the CR is more protected because its major mission is nuclear security.
Right.
And to that extent, they would have less of an impact. I think the Office of Science, in fact, would be pretty devastating.
That'd be devastating. I'll just say I know that my time is almost up, Mr. Chairman. My daughter was an undergraduate at Stanford, and her roommate was a science major, and my daughter was an English major. And when they graduated, my daughter decided to go to law school, where after 3 years she was able to earn more than a member of Congress, whereas her science roommate is still toiling away, earning very little, trying to get her PhD. And unless we incent science, the people who love science really won't stay. And I think the impact you said, the devastating impact this would have on the future of science, which is the young scientists, is something that very much needs to be considered. I'm glad that you raised it, and I yield back, Mr. Hall.
I hope your daughter is fine and helpful to her profession as you have been to this committee. Now, at this time, recognize Mr. Bartlett, one of the senior members of this committee from Maryland, for 5 or 10 minutes, whatever he wants.
Thank you very much. Dr. Chu, thank you very much for your phone conversation of yesterday. I have a couple of questions relative to the Super Duty truck that I will submit for the record, sir. But I want to turn your attention to some slides, the first of which I hope will show up on the screen. Next slide. Okay. I'd like you to take a look at this slide, sir. This is an 08 slide from the World Energy Outlook. Several interesting things about it. By 2030, they show the total amount of liquid fuels that we will have as about 106 million barrels a day. They show the crude oil that we will have from the fields that are now producing crude oil, producing, only about less than a fourth of that. And they show huge contributions of oil from fields that we have now discovered but are too expensive to develop. And then a big red wedge there of crude oil from fields yet to be found. There is a dark red wedge there of enhanced oil recovery. Now, if we can see the next chart, and this is from exactly the same organization, and it's just 2 years later, and some very remarkable differences occur. First of all, they no longer project that we're going to have 106 barrels of oil a day by 2030. They now say we're going to have 96 million barrels a day by 2035, 5 years later. And they have only about a fourth of the conventional oil production coming from fields that we now pump. And they have increased amounts of oil coming from fields yet to be developed and fields yet to be found. if you will look at the total amount of crude oil that they say will be available, it rises only very slightly between now and 2035. If you look at the next slide, sir, and if you have only one slide that you could look at to inform you about oil, it would be this slide. It's an old slide. I hope they update it. You can see that it was an '04 slide. And it shows the discoveries of oil through the past, and you see them in the horizontal bars, in the vertical bars there, huge discoveries starting back in the late 30s and the 50s and 60s. And notice from 1980 on, we have always pumped more oil than we found. And they were projecting in this chart that we were going to reach peak oil production. That's that dark blue one in the previous two slides. We were going to reach that in about when we did, about 06 or 07 or so, and that's exactly when it happened. That's now generally conceded to by just about every authority in the world. Look over on the left over there at the ordinate. You see where 10 billion barrels is. That's a pretty big find of oil. We need to put that in perspective. It's been a long time since we found very many fields with more than 10 billion barrels of oil. Every 12 days, sir, as you know, the world uses 1 billion barrels of oil. Every 12 days, 1 billion barrels of oil. That's about sixth grade arithmetic. Which means if you have a 10 billion barrel find, which is a big find, that will last the world 120 days. Big deal. And now if you look at the fourth slide, sir, and this shows the world according to oil. And Saudi Arabia needs to be diminished a bit because WikiLeaks a couple of weeks ago indicated they've been fibbing about how much oil they have. I suspect much of the OPEC world has been fibbing about it. But, you know, there we are using a fourth of the world's oil. And we have only 2% of the world's oil. We're pumping 8% of the world's oil, which means we're going to pump down very quickly. Sir, isn't this pretty much the perfect storm? At just the time that the world has reached its maximum oil production. And, sir, if you believe that we're going to fill in those wedges with oil to be pumped from fields that we've now discovered and fields yet to be found, you probably believe you're going to solve your personal economic problems by winning the lottery. I think the odds are about the same. This is kind of the perfect storm, sir. We now have peak oil, and we have the developing world, we leading it, trying to recover from a recession. We have the developing world, China and India, demanding hugely increased amounts of oil. We have the WikiLeaks a couple of weeks ago indicating that there's considerably less oil out there than we thought was out there. And now we have this unrest in the Middle East. Shouldn't there be a plan B, sir, in case the wildly optimistic projections of the World Energy Outlook and the EIA and the IEA are not true?
Okay, I think there should be a plan A. Not a
Well,
plan
I don't even see a plan A. So the plan A is business as usual, and that ain't going to work, sir.
Yeah. So let me make a few comments. First, thank you for the slides. If you go back 3 slides at the world, that one. Nope, that one. That's. I will agree with you. We are near the peak of peak conventional oil. I think most oil companies will acknowledge that. What that means is conventional oil is oil on land, easy to access oil, deep, and what this projects is that there are what it's doing is it's logging in current reserves. Current reserves are bankable assets, and they're a very conservative definition of what a reserve is. I do feel that there will be.
That's the next chart, sir. It shows the reserves.
Right, but in this one, it essentially shows just a very slight increase if you include all forms of oil, oil yet to be discovered, oil produced in fields, and unconventional oil, meaning tar sands oil, very thick bituminous oil, things of that nature. And so certainly what this shows is that the oil supplies are plateauing at best, and they're going to be plateauing, and yet we see a dramatic rise in the world wealth of countries, especially in developing countries like China and India, where China's now the biggest car market in the world, 15 million cars a year being sold in China, maybe 16 by now. So what does that tell you? And as you go to harder to access oil, deep offshore oil, oil in the Arctic, more inconvenient oil, the lifting costs increase. So what that tells me is that the price of oil in the following decades, because of the increased demand, because of the higher lifting costs of oil, the price of oil will go up. So our plan A is to recognize the price of oil will go up. It will become a commodity in higher demand, and so we should do whatever we can to decrease our dependency on oil. Certainly our dependency on foreign oil, but oil, period. Because oil is, you know, as you noted, we consume 25% of the oil of the world. We only have 2% of the reserves. So from that alone, you say, so what do we do? Our plan A is to increase the fuel efficiency of cars and really push the pedal to the floor on that one. For the first time in 25 years, we've improved the EPA mileage standards, but we have to do better in the following years. Point two, we can electrify the vehicles. If you begin to electrify vehicles using batteries, which I have a very strong belief that within 4 or 5 years we'll be testing batteries to be put in cars that can enable us to drive 300 miles on a single charge in a mid-sized car, and a battery that costs maybe a third of what it costs today. Okay, under those conditions, you don't think about buying an electric car. The pure economics tell you just go buy an electric car. The electric car you plug in is you're using energy generated in the United States to charge your car, so that you offset the oil dependency that way. And finally, we're doing very promising research in biofuels. Already work done in the national labs is being licensed by companies in the private sector. They're doing testing, demos of this. And we think, you know, the first thing is you use sugars and starches to get to both ethanol, but well beyond ethanol, drop-in substitutes for diesel fuel and for gasoline, for jet fuel. A company, Amyris, is building a pilot plant now for a drop-in diesel fuel substitute. You feed it sugar, bacteria make diesel fuel. They think they can sell it at $4 a gallon, diesel fuel. But that's just the beginning. $4 a gallon is still a little bit higher. $4 a gallon of profit. You know, when you sell $3 a gallon as profit, now we're talking. And as you know, diesel fuel is about $3.50 a gallon now. So the combination of biofuels made from woody materials and agricultural waste, the electrification of vehicles. We also have gas supplies, and so a number of companies are looking at delivery van running off of natural gas. That could be a big player too. And all of those things can decrease our dependency on oil. And this is what I call our plan A.
Sir, that is all true. Just one moment more, Mr. Chairman. That is all true, sir. But your government paid for 4 studies, 2 of them in 2005, 2 of them in 2007, all saying the same thing. The peaking oil was imminent with potentially devastating consequences. The Hearst report, the big one, said if you didn't start planning for that 2 decades before it occurred, there were going to be meaningful economic consequences. Sir, we've run out of time. You don't really believe those 2 blue wedges are going to occur, do you?
Well, actually, I do believe some of it will occur, but be that as it may, I think you and I are in total agreement. We should be pushing as hard as we can to decrease our dependency on oil. We're you know, $300 billion a year is leaking out of our shores to bring in oil.
Sir, I'm way over time. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Senior citizen asked good questions, and we got good answers to go. I don't believe y'all are totally in agreement, but your 20 minutes is up.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
That's good. You were giving good answers, and it's in the record, and I think if we can keep anybody awake that long, they're going to enjoy reading everything we do here. Is Mr. Wu back? All right, then I think we asked Mr. Miller, and I understand Mr. Miller has a request of the committee.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I know that Representative Gifford has the affection and respect of every member of this committee. She's been a very engaged, conscientious member. Her office has asked that I ask a question on her behalf, and I certainly want to accommodate her. And then if I could have perhaps not the full 20 minutes, but a little more than 5, so I could ask the question that I had intended to ask.
Yeah. Without objection, you know you can do that. We want her questions asked, and she's living proof that prayers are answered, and thank you for representing her.
And our prayers continue. Secretary Chu, you've already mentioned that Ms. Giffords was a great advocate for solar power. President Obama at his State of the Union spoke of a Sputnik moment, and 50 years ago, President Kennedy called for an effort to go to the moon by the end of the decade. You called that the moon shot, and you've called for an effort that you call the sun shot to make solar electricity much more competitive in the next decade, specifically to bring down the cost by 75%, and to raise our once dominant position in the market for solar voltaics. It was 43% in 1995. It is now 6%. Ms. Giffords was a great advocate, as you have said. She, a couple of years ago, or just in the last Congress, pushed forward the Solar Technology Roadmap Act, which Congress, following her lead, this committee and Congress adopted. And I'm sure that she would like to know how the Sunshot Initiative does compare to her Solar Technology Roadmap Act that she advocated for so effectively a year or two ago, and how you plan to implement that Sunshot Initiative.
Okay, thank you for the question. And I think in our Sunshot Initiative, what we did is we looked at what industry's own roadmaps were, and we canvassed many companies, both here and abroad, and where they think they could drive down the prices. And this is the full price, the cost of electricity. It's not the cost of the module itself, but the electronics, the mounting, the land use, everything, installation. And they felt that within a decade, one could reduce the cost, the full all-in cost, by a factor of 2, 50% reduction. And we felt that was not quite good enough. And we began to talk with them and develop and ask the question, what could we do in the Department of Energy and what could they do in industry to bring that cost down more aggressively, so before the end of this decade, would it be possible to reduce the cost by 75%? Why 75%? That's the cost where solar power becomes competitive with any form of energy that we have today, the cheapest fossil fuel. And at that point, the country that develops that has all of a sudden got a clear winner that you can export all over the world, the country and companies that develop that technology. That price point will be a very magical price point. Remarkably, in this game plan that we started developing, and we didn't know which technologies would win. There's silicon, there's amorphous silicon, crystalline silicon, various thin film technologies, there's even solar thermal. And all of these we looked at and we said, okay, what we can do is construct a program to give everyone a shot at this. They can all apply for grants. But where you see a clear driver down to this magical price, and the reaction in the industry was actually amazing. I was talking with the CEO of SunPower, former professor at Stanford, Dick Swanson, who's now making the most efficient solar modules in the world, over 20% efficient. And he said, you know, you were great because after your guys started talking to us and we went and we started talking to our engineers, they began to realize, yes, they can do better. This is amazing. That, you know, you're spurring us, and the back and forth between our scientists and their scientists is, you know what, we can do better than we were planning to do. And so what this is now is a technological race among various approaches in the United States where the winner will reap many rewards. And so this is a very exciting thing. When President Kennedy, following President Eisenhower's speech about Sputnik, and, you know, I might remind this committee, by the way, when Sputnik was first launched, his reaction to Sputnik is to say, we have to invest in science and technology and education in science. He did not say, let's put more money into rocket science in the military. It was a very long, far-reaching goal, and said, this is what it's about. The Russians have more scientists and engineers, and the quality of their education is increasing, and for the long-term benefit of the country, this is what we have to invest in. It helps to have a 5-star general to say this. and that's where and started the National Science Foundation and all these other things. So now returning back to the Sunshot, we think we are very excited about this. So going back to Kennedy, when Kennedy said before the end of the decade we'll have a man on the moon, I'm sure there's people in the audience and in America and worldwide who said, no, the guy's nuts. How are we going to do this? But he wasn't. Before he made that announcement, he had a lot of detailed discussions with his scientific team, with the engineers, and with the NASA folks to say, no, this is bold, this is a long reach, but it is achievable.
Okay. Thank you. With the balance of my remaining 15 minutes, I wanted to ask about research generally. Obviously, energy research fared very badly in the continuing resolution passed by the House a couple 3 weeks ago, and the argument by those who opposed the research was that it was really applied research, not basic research. I'm not sure they're really any more favorably disposed towards basic research. But it's not like there's a bell that goes off when basic research crosses over into applied research, and the horizon of when some of this stuff may be commercially practical is pretty far out there, even if it is, strictly speaking, basic research. What would happen to energy research generally if DOE was out of the mix of doing what would be called applied research? And is it really true that energy research by your department is crowding out, is it skewing the marketplace? Is it picking winners or losers? Is it really crowding out research the private sector would otherwise be doing?
The short answer is no, but let me follow up by giving you a few examples. If you look at, for example, what we're funding in the applied research area in things like better air conditioning or better manufacturing practices for photocells. This is in our ARPA-E program. We made our first tranche of funds. We invested in, I think, something like 37 projects, 37 companies. These companies, already a half a dozen, receiving grants on the scale of $3 or $4 million for 2 years, and then after that it's over. You have to go get money from another program, a private sector, somewhere. Half a dozen companies have already did the research that they can then go back to the investment community and say, look, it's working. And those half a dozen companies have increased, and they've received over $100 million of private sector funding, because they proved using our research dollars to do first stage proof of principle. The private investors said, we think it's going to work. Here's some more money. This is exactly what we want to do in the private sector. Were we crowding out the money? No. In fact, if they couldn't prove to the private sector, the investment community, the VC people, that this is actually viable by doing that first little experiment, they wouldn't have gotten the money. But as soon as they get the money, and we well imagine that in many of these companies, that first $100 million will actually be generating hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars as it looks more and more likely that it will be a winner.
I thank the Chair for his indulgence. Thank you, Secretary Chu.
Yeah, I thank you, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. I might remind the members that we kind of we're even and even now on time, and if we can kind of stick to our 5-minute deal out of respect to the other members who are waiting, and I'll recognize the chairman of O&I, Dr. Brown, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Chu, thank you for being with us here today. This committee requested documents regarding the administration's decision to cancel the Yucca Mountain projects on May the 7th, 2009, February the 3rd, 2010, July 20th, 2010, and again on February 14th, 2011. Until I became chairman of the Investigation Oversight Subcommittee, I've received a little more than press releases from your department and copies of letters from other members of Congress in response to these requests. Understanding that I've requested these documents since May of 2009, when can I expect a full and a final production of these documents, and do you intend to withhold any of these documents?
No. My understanding is we have now turned over thousands of pages of documents to you and your staff.
Sir, we have not gotten the documentation. I would appreciate your doing so as quickly as possible.
I will look into it, but we
If
will do it
if you intend to withhold documents, would you provide a Vaughn Index to identify each document withheld, to state the exemption claimed, and to explain how disclosure would damage the interests protected by the claimed exemption. Changing courses a little bit, in September of 2008, you stated, quote, somehow we have to figure out how to boost the price of gasoline to the levels in Europe, unquote. Well, gas is projected to go to $5 or $6 a gallon just this summer. We have an unstable Middle East with potential of having a marked reduction of Middle East oil being available. This will increase the price of all goods and services, and especially food and other necessary things. It's going to destroy jobs here in this economy and hurt our economy tremendously. Sir, when is this administration going to stop prohibiting the development of our own God-given natural energy resources here in the United States and start to pursue an all-of-the-above energy policy and develop those particularly here in the United States, such as ANWR, OCS, and those onshore?
Well, first, in my role as Secretary of Energy, everything we are doing is to develop alternative fuels to help drive down the price of oil, because as we develop those...
Sorry, that may be true, but we've got a lot of oil available, and it's not just about oil, it's natural gas, it's coal, it's everything that we have. And this administration has been prohibiting the development of our own resources. Congressman Bartlett showed us some slides that I've seen and you've seen and all of us on this committee have seen. But this administration is focusing on alternative sources of energy, and I applaud that. We all applaud trying to have more nuclear energy and that sort of thing. But we have energy sources that are available here today, and this administration is blocking the retrieval of those energy sources. And I just beg of you, sir, work to start allowing us to tap into all these energy resources, including the oil and gas we have today. And this administration has been blocking the production and development of those energy resources. It's critical for our economy. It's critical for jobs. It's critical for everything for food prices and everything. So please, please, y'all continue to look for alternative sources. I applaud that. But we need an all-of-the-above energy policy, not just looking to solar and wind and battery production and those types of things. We have oil. We have gas. We have coal. We have other sources. We have nuclear energy. It's very difficult to get licensing. We need to pursue an all-of-the-above energy policy, and I don't see this administration pursuing that, and I hope and pray for the good of all the United States citizens, for employees and employers, that we do so. My time's up. Thank you so much.
Thank you for staying within your 5 minutes. Gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Fudge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Chu. Dr. Chu, I have one question for you. One of the issues that I'm most concerned with is the effects of energy generation on public health, which disproportionately affects low-income urban communities like my district in Cleveland, Ohio. Congress has spent time recently debating EPA regulations and the Clean Air Act. One way to keep our air healthy is by developing new and cleaner methods for energy generation. Could you please describe for me, within my 5 minutes, some of DOE's research and development activities that have contributed to cleaner technology with a focus on public health?
Sure, thank you. If the chairman would permit, if I could spend maybe 30 seconds answering the last question that Mr. Brown asked me.
Well, he's
still here, so that's good. I think developing oil and gas resources in the United States is part of the administration policy, and the President did announce opening access to more drilling in the Gulf with impeccable timing. He announced that 2 weeks before the Macondo well blowout. But we see that, and I agree with you. I think we do need an all above. You can develop oil and gas in the United States, but remember that it's 2% of the known reserves in the world, and we're 25%. So as part of an integrated policy, we feel that is appropriate.
Well, how about ANWR and further putting out the...
I just want you to know this is not on my time, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well,
we're going to start your time all over again.
Okay. so as long as it's part of an integrated policy, we see it is part, and all the above isn't needed. So in response to your question, Congresswoman, I think if you look at the methods we are doing, first, the Department of Energy has done a lot of research in the capture of sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, mercury particulate matter. We were very helpful in the Clean Air Act of the 1992, I believe it was, in helping develop those technologies that actually made it possible to capture the pollutants that were creating the acid rain that was killing a substantial part of our forests and lakes and rivers, particularly in the Northeast. And that's been very successful. The costs are about 1/4, 1/5 of what they initially were estimated to be, and they're still plunging. So the initial costs were overestimates because we tend to underestimate how good technology becomes when given the task. Going forward, if you look at the types of technologies we're now investing in research, both the oxycombustion, where you burn in a carbon dioxide atmosphere and capture that, both in gasification, you're creating power plants that are essentially pollution-free. The amount of particulate matter, the mercury, SOx and NOx that are going to be released is going to be near zero. And so this will go a long way to helping with all the respiratory illnesses and deaths we now suffer in the United States for those pollutants and the mercury that's clearly invaded our rivers and lakes.
Okay, I would just ask as you go forward, though, that you take pay particular interest to what goes on in minority communities, because I believe that you will find the incidence of the effects of these things that you just talked about are higher in communities that are minority communities. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank you for yielding back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fleischman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, Chuck Fleischman, I represent Tennessee 3, which has the great national treasure of ORNL and Y12. And thank you for being here today. Mr. Secretary, it's encouraging to see your support for nuclear power, specifically for small modular reactors, or what we call SMRs, which will be an important source of energy for the increasing electricity demands of our country. Recently, I met with Deputy Secretary Poneman. He visited with me, and we talked about the importance of an American nuclear industry. In my district, the Tennessee Valley Authority is looking to add additional nuclear power to its system using SMR technology. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory and the Y-12 weapons complex are big energy consumers and require safe, affordable, and reliable power for major science and national security needs. It's impressive that your department is making progress on a cost-share program, but there is also a regulatory hurdle which has been brought to my attention. The Department of Energy apparently is prohibited by a federal directive from long-term contracts with utility companies on power purchase agreements. This is a serious roadblock. How will DOE handle the need for long-term power purchase agreements, sir?
All right, I will certainly look into that. There are numerous roadblocks like that. I think that it has to do with utility companies and traditional power providers protecting the turf. So we will look into it and see if we can get some accommodation. I certainly know within the TVA, I've met with the head of the TVA, and that they are very keen. They have a number of very old coal plants that are really at the end or past the end of their life, very inefficient plants, highly polluting plants, and they look at small modular reactors as a possible substitute solution to that. They're small enough that they can be drop-in substitutes for these coal plants, and because the electricity transmission distribution infrastructure is matched to the smaller reactors. And so we are very keen on that. In fact, in Oak Ridge, there is the Cinch River site, which could be an ideal first adopter of small modular reactor there that could power all of Oak Ridge. And as you know, we are investing, in the FY12 budget, we're asking for funds, and we hope Congress can give us these funds, that we can help a number of companies accelerate the licensing process, help with them with their engineering drawings that the NRC would demand. But I would look into, I will plan to look in and get back to you on the regulatory hurdles and what would prevent us from generating power.
Thank you. I have one follow-up question in my time remaining. Recently, I visited the Oak Ridge National Lab, and I had the pleasure of a district tour and saw the Jaguar, which was, I think until recently, the world's fastest unclassified computer. It was a wonderful tour. Last November, though, the Chinese edged out the United States in supercomputing speed. China holds the record on 2 of the top 5 fastest computers of the world. That one measurement, Mr. Secretary, doesn't tell the full story, since the United States maintains an impressive lead, I think, in supercomputing, with half of the world's top 500 supercomputers located in the United States. My question, Mr. Secretary, is what is the Department's long-term strategy to ensure that we don't cede our nation's premier leadership position in advanced computing?
Yes. We, in our 12 budget, are requesting funds to start a new sustained project and going to the next level. The Jaguar computer is what we call a petaflop. Petaflop is 10 to the 12 floating point operations per second or more. That's a lot of floating point operations. 10 to the 12 billions, 10 to the 9. This is a trillion. Tera, peta, no. This is 10 to 15. Sorry. 10 to 15. And so the next 1,000-fold development of a computer that's 1,000 times faster than the Jaguar is something that we would like to develop in our 2012 budget. We've culled money from other parts of all parts of the department, including the National Security Agency as well as Office of Science, to develop a roadmap and a plan to get us to this new exascale, so-called exascale computer. We believe that these high-performance computers are not only incredibly, we need them for our nuclear security, and for the science. But we have also found recently, certainly in the last half decade, that these simulations are so good you can actually design things like a new diesel internal combustion engine, and you can simulate the very complex dynamics of what's happening in this diesel engine and all the chemical reactions that are occurring at this, thousandth of a second shorter time scales. And so Cummins Diesel was able to use our supercomputers to design an engine to skip the prototype design. And they went right to manufacturing and saved, in total development of a new engine, 15% of the cost. We are using these supercomputers to design the next generation nuclear reactors the same way, because we're looking towards the next in carbon capture and sequestration. But what we're finding is that the simulation ability of these computers is so good now, you begin to skip design stages where you make it, see if it works, twiddle around with it, make it, see if it works, twiddle around with it. You make it on a computer, see if it works on a computer, and you can twiddle a lot better on the computer. And so this is a real economic opportunity, and we do not want to lose that leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I now know how you won the Nobel Prize. When they ask you a question, by golly, you answered it. And I'm going to give a Nobel Prize for patience to Mr. Sarbanes, but he left. If he comes back, we'll recognize him first next time, okay? This time recognize Mr. McNerney, the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for appearing before us. Your discussion on the lithium batteries hit home personally because of my experience in industry. I spent 20 years developing wind energy technology, and because of poor government policies on our side, I saw that technology go overseas, particularly to Germany at first and then to India, and produce jobs in those countries, real jobs that should have been produced here in this country. So I'm very concerned about that deja vu happening again with our current continuing resolution. Now, I've always thought that our universities and colleges are the premier, University of California, University of Texas, University of North Carolina, and so on, Stanford and Harvard, for producing an environment of innovation and technology development and so on. And I'd like to see what your opinion is in terms of how this sort of budgeting will affect those institutions vis-a-vis comparison to universities in other countries.
Yes, thank you for that question. Very much so, thank you. The research universities in the United States are still the greatest research universities in the world, bar none. There is still something very, very good about the way we educate our graduate students. It may be deeply in our culture because in research, it's very different than textbook learning. You don't know what the answer is. There's no authority to tell you this is right and that's wrong. And so you actually have to be probing and constantly questioning and be able to question authority. And for whatever reason, the American research universities are very good. So the most innovative, creative things, and the world recognizes this, but they are also working very hard to try to duplicate those atmospheres in other countries. Now, specifically your question, if we start throttling back in funding for the not only Department of Energy, but the NSF, the NIH, and others, but the Department of Energy, I think most people don't realize, is the largest funder of the physical sciences in the United States. It has funded the work of more Nobel laureates than any other funding agency in the world, and it has trained scores of Nobel laureates. When I was a graduate student at Berkeley and a postdoc at Berkeley, I was also a member of Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. That lab alone helped start the careers of 30 people that went on to get Nobel Prizes, a national laboratory. And so the funding cuts that we see, I see the whole thing being put at risk, where the real engine driver for all this innovation, which is the research universities and those national labs, are down put at risk. And so one can come back 10 or 20 years from today and say, oops. Now China is working very, very hard to develop their universities. They have now begun to lure back Chinese who have gotten their PhDs and postdocs, and they've been professors here or working companies here, to come back now in their 30s and 40s to assume leadership positions in academia and industry. And so these are not the people who are 65, but these are the people because they see great opportunity there. And there is great opportunity there. So we cannot take for granted all the people that came to get educated in the United States. If they see, oh, no more research funding in the U.S., they're going to have to look elsewhere.
I'd like to have time to at least one more question. Lawrence Livermore Laboratories is adjacent to my district, and many of the employees that work there live in my district. I've been following the National Ignition Facility progress with great interest. Could you talk a little bit about the potential for fusion technology and our leadership in that area?
Sure. The NIF facility it's initially funded for defense, so that if you want to actually test what's happening at these very high energies and implosions, this is a way of doing it without nuclear testing. And so we can, as part of our stockpile stewardship program. Now, having said that, the fact is that these lasers, what they do is there's a little pellet, really small, hundreds of microns. Huge laser power then generates X-rays that compress this. The Office of Science has now gotten very interested in this because to be able to bring this fantastic amount of energy and power to actually create a micro thermonuclear explosion, now many things have to happen. That means that you are now creating fusion energy. And NIF, within a very short time, will go what I call where you get a huge output, much more power out than in, and you will get a thermonuclear implosion of these little itty-bitty pellets. And so there's a group there at Livermore who thinks that it may be possible that this could lead to a source of fusion power. Now, having said that, I think this is still very researchy. you've got to develop a laser system that's economical, that can work 10 or 20 times a second instead of 1 or 2 times a day. But it has to work very reliably at that rate because, after all, this is turning on our lights and keeping our lights on. And so it's in the future, but we have that possibility. And so, again, in the vein of research, there's another approach to fusion energy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to dedicate the negative balance to the other side.
Thank you. You're pretty close, and I respect you for it. This time recognize Mrs. Biggert, gentlelady from Illinois, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here today. It's nice to see you again. And I apologize for not being here for your testimony, as I have been in a markup all morning, and we've only gotten we haven't even gotten through the first amendment of the first bill. So, but I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. And I know, I think that you know my long history of support for the Office of Science, and I have always maintained that scientific leadership in this country will create the jobs of the future and keep our country competitive. And I know you agree with that. But considering the budget decisions that we face, how would you strategically conserve spending with the department while preserving programs that are integral to our scientific enterprise and international leadership? And specifically, basic energy sciences and computing come to mind. And China's latest supercomputer is a threat to our leadership computing capabilities. And we're on the cusp of outpacing them unless U.S. research is not prioritized responsibly. So do you have any suggestions that might help us strategically prioritize our basic research programs within the budget constraints that we face?
Sure. First of all, whatever Congress decides to give the Department of Energy, I hope I would be asked to be a partner in the funding decisions, but I'll tip my hand and tell you what my leanings are. If we have a diminished budget, I would tend to push to make less investments on the deployment side, the very applied side, the parts where we're helping industry get it onto the field. We would just hope that we can structure policies that would induce private investments. I think the most precious part of our budget is the part that will be continuing to lay the seeds that give you the innovations 5 years and 10 years and 15 years. And that's the Office of Science. And next to the Office of Science is RPE. But RPE is not in competition with the Office of Science. RPE is an applied research program on a much shorter term. And so it should be seen as part of the applied area. Okay? The Office of Science it invests in a different time scale.
I'm glad to hear that you say that, because I think that the risk science really is in the Office of Science.
You weren't here when I was bragging about an event that happened in Argonne National Laboratory. I didn't identify it as Argonne National Laboratory, but the research in the synchrotron facility there that led to the new lithium-ion battery and the addition of manganese was research done at Argonne National Laboratory, and it was done and was considered basic research, but within a very short time it was licensed and it's finding its way into Chevy Volt battery. And so that's a beautiful example of how science can actually deliver the goods sometimes in a much shorter time scale than one would ever expect.
Well, I just had the opportunity to drive a Chevy Volt this morning, so it's quite a car. Didn't drive too fast or too far away. They wouldn't let me put it on the road for racing. But then secondly, I wanted to ask about the term energy efficiency, and is something that many of us have embraced as an all of the above energy approach. And I understand the department is trying to reduce its energy and emissions footprint as part of a department-wide initiative, an executive order, across all sectors of the government. So under those guidelines, is there any concern for our large-scale user facilities and the amount of power that they would consume?
Yes, there is a great deal of concern for those because in many instances they do consume a lot of power. Now, the good news is For example, going to supercomputers, the Jaguar computer at Oak Ridge, for example, or the supercomputer at Argonne consume tremendous amounts of power, but the Department of Energy is very focused on developing research so the next generation of supercomputers on a per unit calculational basis should be consuming 100 times, several hundred times less power per operation. And we think this is possible. And in fact, it's not only possible, if you don't decrease the energy appetite 100-fold, 300-fold, you can't actually get to the next level of computing, which we think you will need. And so, so we think it's going to be, so a large part of what we do now when we design new accelerators, new computers that consume a lot of power is the power management and the energy consumption is a very integral part of what's going on.
And would that affect the advanced photon source too? Is this?
Yes. I mean, but remember, the other thing we'd like to do is we'd like to get a few of these things. We'd like to get a few small modular reactors going.
Yes.
That can just, so all of a sudden now you have clean power that can deliver it as well. Because there are certain things, but even in accelerators, the last generation built accelerators, for example, in the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, it's superconducting, and it actually consumes less power than one of the little injectors. And so, again, this attention to we can't use our entire science budget to run the electricity bill is very much part of the culture now.
I thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you, gentlelady. And I'll quickly recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chairman Hall, and I want to thank the gentlelady from Illinois for that great transition regarding the Chevy Volt. I represent the district that produces the Chevy Volt, and your department's helped promote that technology in vehicle electrification that's going to put Detroit back on the map. In fact, it's already on the map in terms of now developing the best electrified vehicles in the world. Your department, through its basic materials science for battery chemistries, your applied research for onboard power electronics, and also the modeling for preparation of the electric charging infrastructure, all happens within different offices within your department. I'm thankful for your support, but others might say that this may be not an efficient way to allocate department resources. The Government Accountability Office, I know they've looked in areas of government where we can be more efficient, where we can reduce or eliminate waste and duplication. How has your department fared under this GAO review?
So far, we've fared very well, but there's no telling what will happen, next week or next month. I think the GAO review was very kind to us. But to your point about duplication, let me tell you what we're doing. You mentioned the battery program. The battery program is supported in three major areas. There's the more basic physics, chemistry part of the batteries, which is an Office of Science. In the energy efficiency renewable section, we have a very strong battery group, and now ARPA-E has a battery group. And so in the last half year, and going forward forever on, and I was in a review for about an hour, a little over an hour, looking at the detailed things they were planning to, what they were supporting, and what the prospects were. But all three groups were in the room. And going forward, what we are doing is if you think any sector, batteries, transmission distribution, biofuels, advanced biofuels, photovoltaics, what we're doing is we're putting into teams that cut across the formal organizational lines. For example, in our Sunshot, we hired a youngish engineer, Ramesh, a personal friend of Arun Majumdar, who's the director of ARPA and me. We got him to come to the Department of Energy, give up a little of his life to be in charge of Sunshot. Just got elected national, since 40s, just got elected National Academy of Engineering. He had a very good situation. Why would he ever want to come to the government? because he could then cut across all these organizations and say, we're going to have a unified plan to develop how are we going to help industry get there and be the winner. And what can we do in the Department of Energy? What can we do in research to fill in the spaces where industry might not want to invest in, but industry tells us this is the most important thing? Okay, but it's maybe too forward-looking for them to invest in it, given the constraints of their shareholders or their founders. So we're tackling this in a very different way, because what I found when I became the secretary is there would be a very good group in a certain area, but they wouldn't even know what the groups in another area doing. The biofuels was in the applied area, was looking at they had brought on a very good guy who was developing a program. They gave me his plan. You know, I take these and I put all sorts of comments and type all over. But then what I did is I took that plan and I gave it to the 3 directors of the biofuel centers that are supported by the Office of Science, because they hadn't, since this is the plan they have, these are my comments. What do you think about this? Where do you think industry is? Where do you think it's going? Within 2 days, they come back to me. I take those plans and give them back to the applied area. And it said, from here on in, we are going to be doing it that way. When there's biofuels is now becoming an integral part of all the areas, and also ARP-E, so that all the expertise then comes together in a room and figure out a unified plan. And so this is a new way of doing business. I think it's the right way of doing it. They still have their own particular things, whether it's short-term, very short-term applied research or helping with deployment, or the longer term. They still have their own parts, but at least they will know intimately what everybody is doing, and they will coordinate it. And so this is, and there's actually a very nice buzz about that, because what people are finding is there's excellence in little bits and pieces that they hadn't known before. This is something I learned when I was a young scientist, 9 years at Bell Labs, because as a manager at Bell Labs, that was my job. Find out what everybody's doing in the whole organization, and then link up a scientist in my group with someone else far away, and then let the sparks fly. And so that's what's happening.
Thank you, Secretary. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much.
Indulgence.
I
was wondering if I could make one brief point regarding Michigan State University.
Without objection.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate this very much. And this is just very brief. It's just a transition on how we can balance our efforts between research and development. And your department supported, your Office of Science has supported researchers around the country, especially in Michigan. And I want to commend the progress of one of the greatest land-grant universities in this country, Michigan State University. Its work on the facility for rare isotope beams, and thank you again for your support. How does this proposed budget strike a balance between
I hope the Secretary will give a brief answer.
Very, very briefly, the proposed budget wants to support that and get the construction going on that, but it depends on what Congress gives us for the budget. I mean, projects like that would be at risk.
Mr. Hultgren of Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Chu. I'm concerned about the funding for DOE's Office of Science, and specifically high energy physics, the program there, which is clearly in a period of transition right now. Administration has notified Congress it intends to shut down the Tevatron at Fermilab. I've met with, and that's ending here in fiscal year 2011, I met with Fermilab many times, and I know that they, with the end of the operations there of that record-breaking machine and all that's been accomplished there, Fermilab is ready to transition to new programs, one of them including the long baseline neutrino experiment. The LBNE is to be the anchor project for the Deep Underground Science and Engineering Laboratory at the Homestake Mines in South Dakota, as you know. It's my understanding that the President has proposed $32 million for DUSEL and for LBNE in his fiscal year 2012 budget request for DOE. I also understand that the Department stepped in when it became clear that a new stewardship agreement would be needed between DOE and NSF while a study is conducted and decisions are made on the path forward for these projects. Couple questions I had just on situation, and we've talked quite a bit about it, of really the importance of having basic research and all that our laboratories have brought to us. The President's fiscal year 2012 budget request total is $797.2 million for high energy physics. Overall, really does amount to a freeze at the fiscal year 2010 enacted levels, when other programs within the Office of Science are slated to increase from 21 to 24%. My question is, why is there such an imbalance in the basic research portfolio of the Office of Science?
Yeah, that's a tough decision, but let me explain what our thinking was on that. First, this does not mean we want to see an end to high energy physics and also fundamental nuclear physics and cosmology. Those are very, very basic things, and out of that research came amazing things. Just the fact that we have particle accelerators that gave us synchrotrons and light sources and neutron sources, actually its roots were in high energy physics.
Right.
And so it's a very, very direct connection between what you do in research in one area and how it can transform material science or medical research. Right now, yes, we're closing down the Tevatron. There was a move to keep it open for 3 additional years because the Large Hadron Collider at CERN had a mishap with their magnets. And they thought that if you keep that machine running for another 3 years, maybe you can, they're looking for the Higgs, and maybe you can score it under and perhaps discover the Higgs while they're fixing their machine. And in the end, what happened was the Large Hadron Collider got their machine up and running, and in the last several months, they were able to tweak it up and tune it up far faster than we thought they could actually get it up. And then if you look at the flux and the number of events coming out of that machine and the higher energy, then the decision became very clear. You're not on the verge. They weren't on the verge of anything, and the Large Hadron Collider would blow them away. So both the Department of Energy and the director of the laboratory and the management of the laboratory said, we shouldn't do this because this is about $35 million a year to keep it running. We'd rather take that money invested in the high-intensity frontier, which you also spoke about. This is using a new machine to create a lot of neutrinos to look at the neutrino sector. And we think that that is the right decision because this other machine in Europe is just would smoke us. And so we want to continue high-energy research in the United States. I mean, the sad part, as you know, is we could have maintained leadership in this field had we built a superconducting accelerator, the SSC in Texas, but that's water under the bridge. We still think high-energy physics and the questions high-energy physics and cosmology are asking lie at the most fundamental roots of science. What is matter? What is energy? Okay, and we think that this is still in some of the most exciting frontiers in physics, but right now we're trying to figure out, okay, given this big investment in CERN, which we then fund American universities and researchers to go over there, we still need something here in the United States that we can call our own, and we think that this high-intensity frontier is that. But we're going through a tough decision. The high-energy physics community is wrestling with themselves. What's the best? We don't want to just continue. This is austere budget time, so we can't just continue funding at a certain level. We can downsell, but when the great new thing comes along, then I could easily see us coming back up. But right now, that's the plan.
Just quickly, I hope that happens, but I think it is difficult now when the top scientists are going to CERN rather than staying here. And I hope that switch could happen. Mr. Chairman, if I could just have 30 seconds quickly, just specifically on the LBNE, just want to ask you the current status and the commitment. Are the resources there to be able to continue with LBNE and also with DUSEL?
Well, as you know, very quickly, the NSF actually started this project, and we became partners, and then the NSF decided not to. And there were 3 critical experiments that we felt we want to have continue, but we're looking, again, in these very hard budget times, we're going to try to wrestle with it. We'd like to, it can't be the underground laboratory that was envisioned with both NSF and DOE support, but we have a committee now that's assigned to look at what is the best, given whatever budgets we get from Congress, what are the things we can and can't do. And so that committee has just been appointed, and they will be reporting out, but they've just been formed. But we would like to see it continue best we can. Again, it's about money.
Thank you. Just in closing, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much, Dr. Chu. And I do really appreciate your statements earlier when times are tight. I do think we have to make sure that we still have that commitment to basic research where private sector won't necessarily do that work, but this is an important function of government. Thank you very much.
I was hoping for a yes or no answer, but I didn't get it. Mr. Lujan would recognize you at this time.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that. I believe that the appropriate answer would be yes, Mr. Chairman. With that, Mr. Secretary, I want to thank you for being here as well. And if you'll indulge me, I'm going to try to get through most of this, Mr. Secretary. And there's a few questions within my remarks. And if we're not able to get to them, if I could ask that maybe we just get a response in writing. I very much agree with your and President Obama's drive to invest in education, research, and development and innovation in order to better position our nation for the future. Investing in R&D is key. We've heard it time and time again, and especially building off of the closing of my friend that just shared some remarks with us. We know that our nation's competitiveness and our national security depend on it. And I know you're very well aware of the significant role that the people in my district and the people of the state of New Mexico play in both of these areas. Still, the future benefits and the full benefits of R&D can only be realized by coupling R&D with innovation in the marketplace, so that there is a seamless transition from the advances in basic science and new technical capabilities all the way through to new technologies that generate new businesses and new jobs. Other countries are making good use of our scientific advances, and we must do better. I therefore commend you on your efforts with ARPA-E and the hubs to promote innovation in targeted areas of national importance. But there's a need to promote innovation and technology transfer more broadly from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. I, along with co-chair Frank Wolf, has started the Congressional Technology Transfer Caucus to help educate members on the important issues and barriers to technology transfer. The department is home to our nation's national laboratories, which serve as an incredible resource for both developing new technologies from which new businesses and new jobs can spring, as well as for providing technical assistance to businesses. Yet listening to small business owners and entrepreneurs leads me to believe that there is much room for improvement in the department's technology transfer activities. For example, a very few of the department's cooperative research and development agreements, otherwise known as CRADAs, which is a common mechanism for private equity to work with a national laboratory to mature technology, are supported even in part by department funds. Most are 100% funded by private equity, which is prohibitively expensive for many small businesses. Furthermore, the private entity is often required to pay out a significant fraction of the cost to the project up front before the work will even begin. This, too, is prohibitive, and I understand that there's more need for us to support maturation and seed programs by the federal government to help spur this innovative and ingenuity aspect of the private sector. I know that your technology transfer coordinator has been working with technology transfer working groups on ways to improve the department's tech transfer activities. One question I have, Mr. Secretary, are what specific actions do you expect the department to take in the next year to invigorate its tech transfer activities, and to do any of them, including dedicating more funds and reducing barriers to small businesses? Mr. Secretary, recently, as you may be aware, in New Mexico, we experienced record-breaking freezing temperatures that caused a significant increase in the peak for natural gas. The increase in demand led to severe disruption in our natural gas distribution system, causing outages across the state. This was coupled with outages in ERCOT and the Texas energy markets. Over 30,000 homes were left without power to heat their homes. Currently, FERC is conducting an investigation into this. Considering this crisis, I would like to emphasize the importance of supporting the R&D of natural gas technologies to ensure that the overall security of natural gas deliverability to systems in New Mexico and across the country, especially as we talk about powering our vehicles with this important fuel source. The recent National Academy of Sciences report, Expanding Underrepresented Minority Participation, America's Science and Technology Talent at the Crossroads, makes clear that we must continue our efforts to increase minority participation in STEM. In 2007, underrepresented minorities comprised 33.2% of the U.S. college-age population and 26.2% of undergraduate enrollment, yet only 17.7% of those were earning science and engineering bachelor's degrees. I'd be interested, Mr. Secretary, on hearing on DOE's plans to develop a diverse pipeline of STEM professionals in the energy sector, especially in light of correspondence both myself and Senator Bingaman's office have shared. And lastly, Mr. Secretary, I apologize there. I'm going to have to sit to listen to some other responses. In closing, your remarks, you highlight the need to accelerate creation of jobs from R&D investments by increasing the pace of movement from discovery to the marketplace. And I applaud those. What is the DOE doing to improve and streamline the mechanisms for technology transfer from the national labs, especially to small entrepreneurial companies, other than ARPA-E, which has targeted investments in a small number of companies and technologies? What is DOE's strategy to improve the success rate in engaging in the private sector and in technology transfer earlier in the R&D cycle? And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the indulgence there. Mr. Secretary, I look forward to getting those responses, but applaud you on your efforts on the emphasis with making sure that we're taking this seriously. Thank you, sir.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Kavak, who's going to receive the Nobel Prize for Patience. He's been here the entire time. Recognize you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it, and thank you. I appreciate you coming here today. I appreciate your comments regarding austere conditions. We are, as a country, definitely in austere conditions, and I'm finding it very difficult to find the relationship between the Department of Energy and Tinkerbell. If you could put up the ad, please. Thank you very much. You have an extensive website geared towards educating children and putting out a pretty extensive website, so having children talk to their parents about making sure they have Energy Star appliances, programmable digital thermostats, and home improvements, and animated videos. It's I think it's called Save Energy with Tinkerbell and her friends, which is I understand it. I'm a dad, and I get it, but unfortunately we have a $1.6 trillion deficit. National debt, and $14 trillion in debt. Right now, in your budget, you're requesting a 44% increase in the office to fund these efforts. According to my calculations, you may tell me wrong here by your face. If these are funded, how do we think, I question your putting 44% increase in a budget on these type of programs when we're in such austere conditions as you noted. Do you have any empirical evidence that would provide that these advertisements actually change habits, parents' behavior and attitudes towards energy consumption?
You meant 44% increase in this budget. Yeah,
correct, and advertising.
That I wouldn't know about. Is there empirical evidence? No. We do have backward empirical evidence that advertising to kids to try to get their parents to stop smoking was effective.
Well, like I said, in these austere times, I just question whoever put this in the budget, and I question what other things are in the budget. Switching gears here, what actions do you see, especially with the rise of the Chinese developing a deep water fleet, if our supply lines were shut down? Would we have enough domestic energy production to be able to counter any type of advancement of foreign power?
I'm trying to interpret your question. If your question is, I think your question might have been what would happen if we didn't have access to imported oil, or was your question?
Well, correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't 70% of our oil coming from out of state?
No, actually not. It's the latest number I saw is about 51%. It's hovering between 50 and 60%.
Okay, I'll bow to your projections there. I see other data, but what my question is: if our sea lanes were shut down, communist bloc countries, we believe in maintaining free lanes. They believe in shutting them down. So if we had our free lanes shut down, our sea lanes shut down, would we be able to wage an effective war? Do we have the domestic oil supplies ready to go? Do we have the domestic reservoirs ready to go? Can we gear up in enough time to defend this country?
Well, actually, I think that I don't see that as a real possibility. The United States Navy is by far the most powerful Navy in the world. And so
we didn't believe in Pearl Harbor, sir. So I would question
I believe in Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
I believe it happened.
I'm a naval officer, retired 24 years. But this is an option.
Right. But I do think that certainly keeping the lanes open is part of the Navy's job, and it's because of our dependency on foreign oil. And that is actually part of the embedded price of oil, if you will, as you well know.
Yes, sir. My question, though, is if the sea lanes were shut down, would we be able to man our fleet, making sure that we'd be able to be mobile enough to counter any threat? And if not, why are we not developing our domestic resources to a point where we can be at that point? And for the record, sir, I would like to submit this for the record.
Okay. So very quickly to respond to that, as has been pointed out by numerous people here, we consume 25% of the oil and we have 2% of the reserves. And so the way we change the situation is to actually transition and get substitutes for oil in the sense that, and this is a long-term thing, so we've got to start immediately, but the electrification.
Sir, in our current situation right now, would we be able to man and fuel our fleets if the sea lanes were shut down?
Yes or no answer would do.
Okay.
That'll be.
We have a strategic petroleum reserve, which is intended for emergencies like this.
Is it sustainable?
I think it's sustainable enough time for our Navy to open up the sea lanes.
I would beg to differ. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate indulgence. I'll you back by negative balance. Thank you.
You don't have a bad negative balance, and good questions. Thank you. Mr. Tonko, the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Chairman Hall. Thank you, Ranking Member Johnson, for holding today's hearing. And thank you, Secretary Chu, for your leadership and that of our President on clean energy and what you have both described as our out-innovating our competitors in a global clean energy race and the need to win that race. We cannot win the future, however, if we pull the rug out from under our nation's feet. We cannot afford to go backward, and yet it seems as though that is certainly what the new majority in this House intends for us to do. According to Mark Zandi, former presidential candidate to John McCain, as an economic advisor, the CR, or so be it spending bill, would destroy some 700,000 jobs. Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke said yesterday that the bill would cost at least a couple of 100,000 jobs, a number he called not trivial. So it's with that background that I approach you in this hearing today. Mr. Secretary, skyrocketing gasoline prices are deeply hurting the American public. In the Capital District of New York, consumers are paying at the pump about $3.57 per gallon. Nationally, the average price is about $3.38 per gallon, and it continues to rise. Due to the continued conflict in North Africa and the Middle East, oil is now over $100, as you know, per barrel. For every $10 per barrel rise in the price of oil, America sends an additional $40 billion overseas yearly. Plain and simple, we must start thinking outside the barrel so as to create jobs and protect our national security. We're better than the ancient fuel that we put into our vehicles. And I believe that with Representative Bartlett's presentation, he reinforces the efforts to look outside the barrel. Using 19th and 20th century oil subsidies in this 21st century economy is outdated and, in my opinion, foolish. We're literally giving away hard-earned taxpayer money to big oil companies, and what we get in return but sticker shock at the pump. And so instead of cutting subsidies to big oil and CEOs that are making record profits, we are cutting funding to science, funding to innovation, to entrepreneurs, and to our middle class. The CR would slash funding for the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy budget by more than 35%, rescind American Recovery and Reinvestment Act loan guarantee funding for renewable energy projects, and cut funding for energy efficiency programs that create jobs and reduce homeowners' energy costs and carbon pollution. Mr. Secretary, do you think it is wise to continue to provide handouts to big oil companies, especially as prices at the pump continue to skyrocket at a time when we must address our debt and deficit?
No, I don't think it's wise. The President has called for an end to the oil subsidies, which, by his reckoning, is about $3.5 billion a year. But you also have to put that in context. So these are tax breaks, subsidies, where the profits of the oil companies are, 2010, of just the four major oil companies was $75 billion. That's the profit. So the revenues is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So this $3.5 or $3.9 billion subsidy is a little dimple on the overall economics of oil and the cost of oil that I think the American people should recognize. If you're making $75 billion, and those are only the 5 majors. If you're making $75 billion, so if you add them up in total, it could be $100 billion. 3.9 is not a big deal. And so it won't have the effect on prices. And this is what our program has been in the last 2 years. Higher mileage standards, electrification of vehicles, do everything you can to develop biofuels that would be substitutes, drop-in substitutes for the oil. So we diversify our transportation fuel supply. And when we get electric vehicles or gas vehicles, powered vehicles, natural gas powered vehicles, this is energy produced in the United States. So the wealth remains in the United States. Another big plus. So this is the plan. We've got to decrease our dependency on oil and diversify. Our transportation needs are almost exclusively dependent on oil, and we've got to diversify that, or otherwise we still will be hostage to these very unstable prices.
Thank you. And according to the Office of EERE, the number of fuel cell and hydrogen megawatts shipped by non-U.S. companies has increased by 40% in just 1 year. And yet, in my opinion, the budget does not provide enough funding for this critical technology. It is a proven technology, including some companies within the United States, such as those used for forklift applications that are commercially deployed today. In your opinion, is there a role for fuel cells in complementing renewable and traditional fuels?
Yes, there are, and we're trying to toggle. These are decisions. Especially if you look at forklifts, there are 3 alternatives. There's natural gas powered for forklifts. There's electric vehicles, and then there are fuel cells. And so we are looking very closely at all of those are lower pollution, even standard pollutions. So especially in a city environment or a building environment, they're very clean. In the longer range, and we're also looking very closely at what the automobile manufacturers are doing in fuel cells. It all depends on what the battery technology is, because for the longer range, a fuel cell is an option. Ultimately, we still have to solve the hydrogen source problem. Right now, most of our hydrogen comes from reforming natural gas, and then you still have the carbon dioxide from that natural gas. And so we are also investing in research that says, very innovative research, sunlight directly into hydrogen in a very low-cost application. If you can do that, then the major hurdle is where are we going to get the hydrogen?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of other questions that I'll enter through the committee after the hearing.
I thank you for it.
Thank you so
you,
much.
gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'd like to submit for this article from the Wall Street Journal that describes how companies like Whirlpool and GE have banked enough green energy credits so they'll not have to pay corporate taxes for years. I offer this as a response to the claim that the administration is not picking winners and losers, particularly when the President suggests to increase taxes on oil and gas without objection. So ordered. Chair recognizes Mr. Lipinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Save the best to last here. Dr. Chu, I appreciate all your work, especially in these especially difficult times at this point. I know that you share my concerns about the rapidly rising costs of our dependence on imported oil. And I think part of the solution to our energy problems is the use of nuclear power along with vehicle electrification. That's why I was particularly interested in a portion of your written testimony that discusses cost-shared activities with industry that might help accelerate commercial deployment of small modular reactors. And I know that you have answered a number of questions on this and addressed this already. So I just want to say, specifically on SMRs, I think the budget is a good start, though I'd like to see an even greater commitment to SMRs. But I know this is the first time that DOE has actually really put an effort put the funding behind helping to move these forward, and I'd like to see more of that in the future. One other area, though, of when it comes to nuclear power that I'm concerned about is that much of our skilled workforce is nearing retirement. And this includes skilled tradesmen and women, technicians, as well as scientists and engineers, including thousands that work in your agency. So I just want to ask, what action is DOE taking to ensure that there are sufficient skilled craftsmen and technicians to build America's clean energy facilities and staff U.S. manufacturing facilities? And do you think that we are doing enough on this?
I don't think we're doing enough, but I think people enter into job training and enter into, they make choices in undergraduate, graduate school based on where they think they can get jobs. So ultimately, it's very important that the United States shows signs that it can restart the nuclear industry domestically at home, which means you build more reactors. We were able to build over a 20-year period. We were essentially started the entire fleet of nuclear reactors we had today, over 100. Were started within a 20-year period. There was a long tail of them finishing, but never mind that. So I think if it's clear that the United States is willing to make the investments in nuclear reactors here in the United States, and again, the clean energy standard would be a major driver that will allow that to occur, that because it is a form of clean energy, then I think the supply lines, the tradespeople you talked about, the engineers that would be needed in order to do this, that all becomes part of the process. As long as you see that, and that's why other countries want to stimulate the production of new energy and new energy infrastructure, because all of those things, then all the manufacturing capabilities are usually built domestically, because it doesn't make sense to set up a very long supply chain internationally, especially for the heavy products. And so the clean energy standard would be the single most important thing you could do to say, stimulate, we're serious about reinvesting in the United States power infrastructure. And that would include nuclear reactors. And all the other training and everything will follow suit, because they say, I have a job.
I'd like to go further with you on that, but at this moment, with the time I have left, I want to ask about one other area. I was excited to see that the President's budget shows a clear commitment to developing a more sustainable industrial sector in the U.S., as evidenced by the significant increase in the Industrial Technologies Program, which helps manufacturers become more efficient. I know the ITP program, especially the Industries of the Future subprogram, has helped the American steel industry dramatically reduce its energy consumption while increasing production. How would the proposed increase in ITP and similar programs contribute to the long-term viability of manufacturing in our country?
I think it'd be a great help. I think a number of front-leading companies have been the bullet, either with help of the federal government or they did it on their own. Where energy-intensive companies, I mean, Dow Chemical is a perfect example of that, where, here's a company that's it takes carbon in the form of oil and natural gas, typically, and converts it into another form of carbon in terms of plastic. And it's a very heavily energy-intensive transformation from one form of carbon to the other. And so they are able to save tens of millions of dollars a year now by driving to very high efficiencies. DuPont similarly. So many companies are realizing you make investments in energy efficiency in their industrial practices, and it is really good to the bottom line. I don't know whether it's tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, I forget, but it's a tremendous amount of money, a very rapid return on capital, all good things. And so anything that the United States can do to help companies make their transition to save money by saving energy, it would be a very good thing.
One last thing, as the author of the H Prize, I was very happy to hear your what you said in answer to the last question about the these great potential advances in producing hydrogen besides from natural gas. So thank you again for all your work. I yield back.
Well, thank you for your yield back, and I certainly thank Dr. Chu for his very valuable testimony and the members for their questions. I apologize for not running a more youthful chair. I'll try to do better, and I'm going to give Mr. Sarbanes half of my time when we meet on the next occasion here, half of my opening statement to him, where he would be assured that he'll get to ask questions. And you've been so generous with your question and with your answers. The members of the committee may have additional questions for you, and if you will, we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments. And Dr. Chu, you and your fine staff are to be certainly thanked for your accommodation of your time and the time it took to prepare and the time it took for you to come over here. I know you've been away from a very valuable job now for the last couple of hours with us, and we thank you. This hearing is not adjourned until Mrs. Johnson gets to say what she wants to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Dr. Chu, but I would like to request unanimous consent to enter 2 articles in the record, one by George Will in reference to the scientific engine, and one by Martin Kondracki who talks about the Americans' sea corn.
Without objection, they're admitted. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.